Welcome back to our podcast. Today we have Martin Cloake on the interview line with us today. He's got a real interesting mashup of a whole number of interesting fields. He's got a combination of an engineering background as well as telecommunications and technology, as well as manufacturing. So he's been able to find an intersection between those points, and that intersection is the lack of tools in understanding and using data. So Martin has started a company that looks at the data that comes out of the manufacturing process and then moves forward with that and beyond analytics. Welcome, Martin. And maybe you could give us a bit of a sense for what you saw missing in the manufacturing area based on this mashup of experiences and credentials that you have. What did you see missing there? What was the tool set that was missing?
Hey, perfect. Thanks for having me on the podcast, first of all, James. So as you were mentioning, my background is quite diverse. My background is engineering, but I started my career after engineering school in manufacturing. And one of the interesting things that, as an engineer going to work on a manufacturing shop floor, my first instincts were to dive into the data. And I remember at some point while I was working at Blinds to Go in Montreal, I was knee deep in the data describing performance for this blind shop. I started getting a hard time from my boss saying, Martin, stop playing with Excel so much. It's your job to go out there and work with the team on the shop floor. So as an engineer, I saw this frustration that I wasn't given the time to look at the data. But once I actually finally listened to him and went to the shop floor and started working with my teams, I was able to drive tremendous improvement. And I kind of realized after working in manufacturing that it is still fundamentally a people business. But there was still this lingering frustration that I wasn't given the time or had the right tools to analyze the data. So I guess the challenge right now in manufacturing and also 15 years ago was that the people who are responsible for analysis are also responsible for being leaders on the shop floor, and there isn't really time to do both.
Martin,
so I guess that would go ahead.
Sorry, Martin, I didn't mean to interrupt. I like this interesting takeaway that you just mentioned there about this connection between people and data, because as we move forward into the Internet of Things, and I'm sure you're seeing this in the manufacturing world where everything is providing, gigabytes of data per day or even maybe per hour. My understanding is a car will be producing 25 gigabytes an hour, and I'm sure you're seeing that similar data in the manufacturing area. And you alluded to this connection between people and data and equipment, and that intersection is really interesting because we tend to think that with AI, which I understand is also one of your skill areas, with AI, that AI will take over decision making. But my understanding is that you're seeing a real interesting coming together of people and data and AI. And I wonder if you could just kind of elaborate of how you see this playing out over the future of better data, better analytics, and better understanding and better action.
Well, I think one of the things that realized early on after founding Raven was that simply presenting information doesn't necessarily provide value. So the first iteration of Raven was simply presenting a dashboard, and after chatting with our early customers, realizing that they don't need to see what happened, they need to know what they're supposed to do. And it's interesting that you bring up cars and the data produced there, where in some ways for us the gold standard for data analysis and providing direction is GPS with traffic. So you can think of GPS, like I just used that when coming to the office. I just use GPS in my car. And you can think of all the data that is available to be analyzed, describing what has happened historically, current traffic conditions, and it's taking all this data and digesting it to the point where it's able to provide extremely simple directions. Turn left in 200 feet. So really, for us, that's the gold standard, where it's not a bunch of graphs and charts. Really, it's helping them figure out what to do now. One of the things that we talk a lot about at Raven is that there's performing data analysis by itself provides no value. Really, in order to get value, somebody actually needs to do something differently. They need to change their behavior. So there's two parts to this equation. So I always think of this big mashup of data, and today it's never been as easy to collect massive amounts of data. You mentioned IoT. The technology today is extremely inexpensive to collect monstrous amounts of data, and AI and data science get to the point where you can actually figure out what the answer is. What is the solution to this puzzle? But still, at that point, you have not achieved any value. Producing a report that describes why you're always late for work isn't really that useful. What you need to get to work on time. So you start off with a bunch of data. You now use all this fancy technology to come up with the answer. And between getting the answer and driving changes of behavior, it's a lot more psychology and understanding human nature and giving the right information to the right person at the right time. That is important. And that's really what we've focused on at Raven, which is how do we take all this data, how do we take this answer that we know and present it in a way that actually motivates people to behave differently. And it's extremely interesting. And really, it all comes back to looking at this perfect example, which is GPS for your car. Extremely simple from an operator perspective, but extremely effective.
Martin, I noted that several times you mentioned changing behavior and doing different, which is really cool, because we often think of technology as maybe cutting costs or maybe finding new revenue possibilities. But this idea of doing different, of using the AI that you've got to be able to do different is really cool and an interesting way of looking at the future. Can you paint us a picture? If I had a manufacturing facility and I have Raven technology there, what does it look like? You talked about action and the ability to change behavior and the interaction between people and machine. Can you kind of paint us a picture of how that actually plays out on the shop floor? We've got some machinery, we've got some people, we've got this AI analytics. How does this actually work day to day? I mean, what is it looking like?
So we install our tablets throughout the shop floor, and in a lot of ways, it's similar to that GPS unit in your car. So basically, we install tablets on the shop floor that monitor the process. So that could be monitoring the output of a machine, monitoring the throughput of a manual process where they're scanning. So the first step for us is to instrument the process. We need some way to know what's going on without the user having to tell us. So if you walk to our shop floor, we have this tablet. The way we set it up is that it has a couple different colors. If the tablet is presenting in green, basically it's telling the operator that there is no action needed whatsoever. And I think one of the things that we also want to make sure we do in manufacturing is if nothing's going wrong at your station or at your process, you do not need to interact with technology. And really, our mission is for those who are trying to guide and we want to minimize how much they interact with our technology, which isn't necessarily the objective of all firms, creating new tech. We want technology that people barely have to use. So, effectively, if you're walking through the shop floor, you'll see a tablet here that presents some basic information. But if it's green, basically, from an operator's perspective, they don't need to pay attention to it. So now, throughout a process in manufacturing, there are stops and starts. Things run at certain speeds, and effectively, if we detect in the data that something is going on that's abnormal, for example, a machine is running slower than it should. You were changing over from one job to the next, and it's taking a bit longer than it should. So then our screen basically asks them a question. It flips to red and says, what's going on? How can we help? So the screen flips to red, and a few options pop up. Have you ever used the have you ever used Waze? It's kind of similar to GPS traffic. It's similar to Google traffic.
Yes, I have.
So Waze is interesting because you're driving along and suddenly you stop in traffic, and a little message pops up and says, "Hey, are you stopped in traffic?" And then it asks for why, and you say, "Oh, there's construction, there's an accident." So basically, Waze complements the data they're getting from all the cars with this user inputted data, and that's similar to what we do. So say the process is been stopped for an unusual amount of time. The operator says it's stopped because I've run out of material, or my machine is broken. So at that point, once the operators have given us the reason for why there's an issue, that is the extent of what we ask of them. And really, when we present what Raven does, it's really a tool for them to apply pressure to their leadership, to their bosses, to give them what they need. Pressure when things aren't going well. And now we've captured, because of the data, the moment that they don't have what they need for their job to be easy. So in the case of missing material, well, they don't have material, they can't do their job. Our system would then go and get alert the warehouse or their supervisor saying, "Hey, Bob over there in line number 2 needs some material." But what this does for us is this begins to gather more and more data that describes, in addition to what the machines are doing, it describes what the operators are doing. So how long did it take for Bob to acknowledge that there was this problem, and then how long did it take for his boss to actually come and solve it? So in some ways, a lot of people measure the output of performance to see how things are going. Whereas the reality is, if you have a healthy process, it will perform. So what we're trying to do is understand the health of the process, which is a combination of what machines do and what people do. And if we detect unhealthiness, basically we let leadership know, go over there now, they need your help.
Martin, I have a lot of conversations with people in different industries, for example, financial and healthcare, and I'm wondering whether this approach that you're implementing, now obviously it's a different data set, but I'm wondering whether that kind of concept at the abstract level would fit in other industries. So can you see people in, let's say, a pharmacy or a retail store, or a big bank or an insurance company, or within a hospital, using that kind of idea at the abstract level?
Well, at the highest level, what we are interested in, what we're trying to do, is performance management. We happen to be working in manufacturing because that is an area of expertise. So our team has a pretty broad background in manufacturing. Former president, CEO of Tier 1 automotive manufacturer, an ops manager from P&G. We understand manufacturing, we understand data, but at the highest level, this is performance management. So for us, we are focused on what we know. We are focused on what we love, which is data science and manufacturing. But the approach to actually translate all this data and all these answers into action is universal. And I think this is where more and more industries will go, where to realize that in order for an AI project to be successful, they need to drive the numbers, drive improvement. In order to drive improvement, in most cases, people need to do something differently. So that component that I mentioned earlier, which is to understand people, human nature, it is a key component to making any of these kinds of technologies successful.
Martin, I like this idea of doing different in action based on data. It's such an interesting theme that we've heard over the last 15 minutes or so. Now, suppose I was the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer, or the CEO of a bank or an insurance company or a hospital, and I'm really excited about action based on data and doing differently. As a takeaway, what would you suggest for them as a starting point? I mean, where do they have to start with? Do they have to look at, is it all about where the data is? Is it all about figuring out what questions they want to ask? Is it all about understanding what kinds of actions can be derived from data? Where's the starting point?
I think the starting point is awareness. I think a lot of companies measure performance at different levels, and they may not necessarily have those numbers and that performance communicated throughout in a consistent way. In manufacturing, for if you are embarking on your continuous improvement journey is what they call it. The first step is to become aware, and to become aware, you need to basically measure performance. So this is even if you're using the driving to work example, like how long does it take you to get to work? So I think the foundation is being aware of performance, and you don't necessarily need fancy technology to do that. And then there also has to be an interest to improve. So once you're aware of performance, are you motivated to improve? Are you motivated to take action? So if you're in your car with GPS and you don't care what time you get to work and you're ignoring the instructions because it doesn't matter, it's not useful. So first step, become aware of performance. And then the second step, determine if there's actually an interest in improving. I think that's really the foundation here. And I think, it's interesting in working in manufacturing. So when I was there, I did, when I first started, when I wasn't listening to my boss there, I was doing a bunch of analysis. And really after I listened to him, I spent more time on the shop floor. I really wasn't performing that much analysis, but I was still able to drive pretty decent improvement. And that was by understanding performance, communicating it, and simply that will drive improvement. So I think once companies have already established that momentum from becoming data centric and data aware, so that is really the first step before even bringing in technology.
Okay, very cool. So good takeaways, data centric and data aware. I have lots of conversations with people in different industries, and they're starting to wake up to this. And I often get this question of, well, where do we start and where does the data come from and what do we mean by data aware? But so it's really cool that we've had a chance to talk about that. That comes to the end of our podcast, and I want to thank Martin Cloake, CEO of Raven Telemetry, for his contribution today. Thank you very much, Martin.
My pleasure.
And that's it for today. Stay tuned for another podcast coming up.